When it comes to the discussion of the greatest animes of all time, there's plenty of household names that echo through the halls of fame in every fan's mind. And of these greatest anime, I've boasted experiencing the majority of them. From rubber pirates to Shinigami, all the way to a high schooler with a book of death. However, there's been a lingering void for all this time. A single name has eluded me. I've heard whispers of its grandeur, talks of a story that transcends the medium. An anime people claim as the single greatest anime of all time with a protagonist who is ubiquitous as a figurehead of the genre. I have finally begun the journey of Code Geass, a story set in an alternate timeline under the rule of Holy Britannia, where Japan, now known as Area 11, is conquered through mechs known as nightmare frames, where we follow the story of Lelouch, who from childhood vows to dismantle Britannia and liberate Japan. A holy conviction that when these words were spoken, you could feel it swell up and resonate in your heart due to the sheer emotion and weight of the vow. Code Geass struck me immediately with its premise. This was something unlike anything I've ever seen. I've always relatively stuck with the shonen and seinen genre, which has been undoubtedly my favorite since childhood. And I sure as hell have never seen mechs outside of Mechamaru, but I've always been interested in a mech power type story given my love of Transformers as a kid. Shout out Bumblebee. One of the elements with mechs within this story that interested me is that they're a component of the story, but they're not the main focus. Instead, they're used as tools and weaponry to explain Britannia's conquest over the entire world. Much like the invention of flint and steel, this technological advancement put Britannia into a league of its own, with nations left to either submit or be forcibly put down. This state of affairs left us to witness this invasion that wrecked Japan, and through this carnage that Lelouch experienced, it sowed a seed within this young man to one day dismantle Britannia. A wishful dream against such technological genius as of the mechs. How could anything or anyone stop them? In a turn of fate with a chance encounter with an ethereal green-haired girl, Lelouch is given the chance to change the history of the world as he knows it, a chance to fight back. This is my journey with Code Geass. As we set into the story and witness Lelouch uttering this vow within our story's genesis, a green-haired girl watches our young protagonist and his best friend Suzaku bear witness firsthand to the destruction of Japan. Suzaku in this moment was enshrouded with an air of sadness, and Lelouch with an assured wrath and conviction. Even as children, this duality of our Lelouch and Suzaku and their emotional state sets up their distinct differences that become fully on display as the story evolves. Two polarities of reactions with far different paths to follow. However, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I've seen visuals of this green-haired girl anytime I've seen Code Geass discussed, and I absolutely love her design, and seeing her watching over Lelouch as a child indicated to me that she's been watching him throughout his entire life. That just maybe one day she was waiting for him to be ready to receive this gift, or perhaps a curse she eventually bestows upon him, that it was all planned. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of time travel involved for her leading to this moment, but I suppose only time will tell. This ethereal feeling of this green-haired woman, along with a bit of eerie audio, made this entire brief opening scene feel like a fever dream, as we're brought many years later to the current day where Japan has been named Area 11, and Lelouch plays a game of chess, starting the game by moving the king. I'm no chess player, but from my non-existent experience of this game, this is a hell of a risky move. This small instance of chess demonstrates to me a self-assuredness and regal confidence Lelouch carries. He wasn't playing to survive the match and prevent checkmate, he was playing to win at all costs with full belief in himself. Two of his quotes he lays out really stuck with me. If the king doesn't lead, how can he expect his subordinates to follow? And that the only ones who should kill are those prepared to be killed. These two quotes lay out a groundwork to what seems to be his philosophy. If you want to be king, you must act, and that blood comes with blood. This really excited me for what's to come as we peel back these layers of Lelouch. Lelouch struck me as different than a lot of other protagonists I've encountered who we typically meet in the story where they're in a state of perhaps weakness or self-doubt. But right away, Lelouch was him. He walked, talked, and carried himself with this cockiness that I was immediately drawn towards as a protagonist. I'd honestly be remiss if I didn't mention that I felt a comparison with Lelouch in Light, and even a little bit of late game story Eren, with this subtle yet dark indication that he was always a move ahead. Without really knowing any backstory outside of a brief flashback of him as a kid, I quickly put a few pieces together as we see some scenes of his classmates at what apparently is a prep school, and given the chess match took place with nobles, I thought in this moment that it's likely that Lelouch is some form of nobility, or the nobles approve of him enough to gamble chess matches with him. Lelouch isn't living in squalor like a lot of other 11s, and he's privileged enough to live what appears to be a pretty luxurious living in Japan. This juxtaposition of circumstances was shown with two members of what Britannia calls terrorists, or as they truly are, the Resistance, as they've stolen cargo from Britannia and are disguised as truck drivers. Within their conversation, you could immediately hear the fear and determination and emotion in their voices as they knew how risky what they're doing is. I'm really impressed with the voice acting so far, and what stands out to me always is if I can truly feel the emotion behind the words, and throughout everything I've seen in Code Geass thus far, the voice acting is phenomenal. In case you were curious, I'll admit I'm watching it in dub. There's some further exposition where we witness Prince Clovis deliver an entirely staged speech where the moment the video stops rolling, he reveals his true nature and disgust for Area 11. As I'd soon come to know, everything within this kingdom is about optics and conveying a narrative they want the public to follow. However, it's a house of glass where everything can shatter. The greatest way to control a population is to control a narrative, and I love the socio-political gameplay that Code Geass uses. Clovis honestly comes across as a spoiled man-child, and the vitriol he evokes is perfect for a Joffrey-esque prince. I love compelling villains, I wonder how long he'll last. In order to regain the cargo, Clovis orders his military to send out the Nightmares, and holy shit, I couldn't imagine a better name for mechs than Nightmares. Design-wise, they look absolutely insane, and piloting one looks like every kid's dream. So just within a few brief sequences were revealed two directly opposing entities who will ultimately be at conflict for what I imagine to be the entire story. With the Resistance members Callan and Nagata driving the truck and eventually crashing, Lelouch goes to investigate and ends up stuck inside the vehicle as a high-speed chase ensues, which results in Callan using a mech of her own to fight back as her partner attempts to escape. However, against the Vertania military, this hope is crushed with Nagata and the truck being closed in upon, with Lelouch still being stuck in the stolen cargo. Amongst the members who were sent to receive this cargo is Suzaku, who now works for the very government in which he bore witness to the horrors of, as it's revealed he's an honorary Britannian. With Lelouch being found out, it looks like he's in a bit of a tough circumstance because it honestly looks like he's part of the terrorist organization, and I'm sure through his head he's like, please no, I promise I didn't do anything wrong. Through this interaction, it's evident Suzaku and Lelouch haven't seen each other for years, which mirrors the same sentiments I had earlier with them having an entirely different path. This cargo contains poison gas, and with the poison gas being released as a last measure, to everyone's surprise, even Suzaku, this was in fact no poison gas, but instead a young woman, the very ethereal green-haired girl we saw a glimpse of earlier, who we'd eventually learn her name to be Cece. So many questions arose within this moment, but before we had any time to think, simultaneously Clovis orders the destruction of Shinjuku in order to eliminate this secret from ever getting out. It's evident to me that Cece for some reason is an entity who can pose the potential destruction to their kingdom, and they do anything to stop it from reaching public knowledge. With Suzaku face to face with his childhood best friend in his current role, he was ordered to eliminate Lelouch, but Suzaku refuses, resulting in he himself being shot. Suzaku, despite being an honorary Britannian, is uncorrupted and still retains his sense of right and wrong, and he's punished for it. Obviously, I didn't think Suzaku was dead here, but it still was a brutal scene to witness. With the bloodshed continuing, with Nagata in his final moments, he explodes the vehicle, allowing for an albeit temporary escape as Lelouch and Cece are cornered, with Cece eventually taking a bullet for Lelouch, and with this, the plot truly began. In just a moment that felt like an eternity, Lelouch is posed with the question, an offer to accept the power of the king, a power that would force him to live a life of isolation due to this power, but a power that could give him strength to fulfill his vow. Honestly, I have chills reading the script right now. This was such an amazing scene. I found it so interesting that Cece, despite being dead in the physical world, she's able to still appear to Lelouch almost like a fairy or an angel where she transcends the realm of mortal men. And with this brief glimpse of her power, I was brought back to her observation of Lelouch as a young child. In this moment, Lelouch accepts this godlike gift, and with it he announces his true name. His name is Lelouch Vertania and instructs all the soldiers to die, and in doing so they take their guns and end their own lives in an absolute insane turn of events. Holy shit, guys, with this reveal of Lelouch's true name, it confirmed that he was royalty, but it brings about far more questions than answers, and I cannot wait for the reveal of how in the hell it makes any sense. Like telling your enemies to kill themselves with no hesitation? Fucking epic. Lelouch's new power, Geass, is the power to command others to do absolutely anything. With this new power, his eyes light up and you can see its effects spread to the nervous system via this godlike power. What made me love this ability is that it requires the user to be incredibly intelligent in the use of it. Like, sure, it's overpowered, but to really maximize the full extent of its capability, the user needs to be pretty cracked. As well, what struck with me is that this notion that the power of the king is isolating, and it reminded me of one of my favorite villains of all time, Aizen, and how his insurmountable power isolated him. When you are unlike anyone else and powerful beyond all means, it results in a complete isolation from others. Lelouch, with just his words, could get whatever he wants from anyone. How could he not feel in solitude with this power? However, if anyone's fitting for the power, it's him. The power of the king was given to the individual who believes the king must act to follow. He won't be liberating Britannia from a distant safe room, but instead the battlefield. With Cece being in the story such a short amount of time, I was honestly pretty disappointed as I expected her to be a relevant character outside of the inner consciousness of Lelouch, but the ending of this arc gives me hope for her. After Lelouch commands the soldiers to end their own lives, there's no time for rest as the complete eradication of Shinjuku takes place, and he, like an angel on the shoulder of the resistance, commands their formation and strategy to survive and stop this annihilation. With so many pieces in place, Lelouch shows his mastermind tactics and why he's such a great chess player as he simultaneously pilots a stolen mech while also shot calling. Another piece eventually returns to this game of chess as we're shown Suzaku is not dead, and we encounter a scientist named Lloyd who gave me Mayuri vibes from Bleach, who coaxes Suzaku awake and he asks him to pilot a nightmare the first of its kind to Lancelot. I honestly got the vibe that Lloyd is the type to experiment on humans and not lose any sleep at night, but I can't let my preconceived notions get the best of me. After all, he lets Suzaku pilot an all-white nightmare that is by far the best looking of the nightmares, and it's the one that I'd want to pilot. It's regal, intimidating, and has this vibe that the good guy should be piloting this. I'm glad it's in the hands of Suzaku. With him piloting this god-tier nightmare, he saves countless people and aims to stop the utter destruction being caused, and he very easily could have wiped out the resistance if not for him saving a woman and child. Suzaku time and time again is bound by his unwavering moral compass, and it gives me hope for true change within Britannia. Just hours prior, he was shot by his fellow soldiers, yet here he stands with no grudges defending what he believes is right. With Callan and Lelouch escaping, Lelouch, like a madman, rather than gathering himself after the chaos, instead infiltrates the base where Clovis is, and he uses his power to stand face to face with the prince as Lelouch reveals who he truly is. Once more I need to say his name, Lelouch v Britannia, a member of the royal family. A revelation that is currently only known to Clovis as it seems, and Lelouch commands a ceasefire of Shinjuku and then inquires about the details of his mother's death. This reveal was incredibly heartbreaking and was paired with an amazing soundtrack as we learn part of what makes Lelouch who he is. His mother was assassinated in a supposed terrorist attack, and in the attempt his sister was left crippled and blind. In questionable circumstances that Clovis himself doesn't even know about, Lelouch suffered a loss that cannot be filled. I felt for Lelouch. Losing my mom myself, I immediately resonated with him and began to understand his determination in seeking vengeance and why it's so important to him. I've always really connected with characters who lose their mom, and every time I bring it up in videos, it's a little reminder and a little bit of keeping my mom alive in spirit every time I talk about her. With the circumstances of Lelouch's mom's death unknown, there is one certainty. It had something to do with the royal family. With Lelouch gathering all the information he needs, he then ends the life of Prince Clovis. I know I said earlier that I was excited to see a villain as dislikable as him, but if he's dead now, I can only imagine what kind of evil will follow in his place. Lelouch, with literally having this power for almost no time at all, he's shaken the world as we know it with eliminating the Mad Prince and saving Shinjuku and the rebels. I actually recently went to Shinjuku when I was in Japan, and there's varying locations that are mentioned within the story that I literally just saw with my own eyes. Pretty surreal. So far, Lelouch as a protagonist has already broken a multitude of protagonist codes, the most obvious being killing. With so much blood on his hands and a lack of hesitation, it's clear we aren't following a story where Lelouch is aiming to save everyone, both good and bad. He isn't wanting to change the system, he wants to eliminate it. This dichotomy of Lelouch and Suzaku is so poignant, I'm continually reminded of it with each of these scenes, and it's not often we encounter a deuteragonist who's the objective good who wants to save everybody and change the world from the inside out. Usually this role is in the hands of the protagonist. However, with these roles opposite to how they're typically presented, I have so much hope for a completely unique story laying out these two perfect storylines of the White Knight Suzaku and the Dark Prince Lelouch. I'm honestly so hooked and so locked into this first arc, and I'm having a hard time deciding who I like most amongst the characters. With the storyline taking us briefly back to high school where we find Callan as a classmate attending the same school, right away that compels Lelouch to use his power, and we're thereby shown the limits of Geass. This godlike ability can only be used on an individual once. It's a fitting power restraint, but it came at the expense of Callan now being tipped off to his voice, which, of course matches the mysterious one who saved the resistance, but before she's able to call him out, she gets a call from the very same voice she believes to be Lelouch, thereby throwing her off his trail. To lay out the scene where it all took place, it was honestly super anxiety inducing as we see a lot of fan service going on, and it felt like Lelouch was genuinely about to be caught. I didn't think he had a plan to avoid this. Honestly, the amount of thinking ahead this requires is hugely big brain, and it shows that Lelouch is always one step ahead. It's some intense Death Note style mind games occurring, and it feels like a game of cat and mouse as Lelouch very narrowly escapes being caught. My first impressions with Callan is that I'm a huge fan. I really enjoy her pretty abrasive and intense personality, and I like that she's a member of the story because I'm always a fan of strong females in stories. There's a really emotional scene I wanted to touch on with Nonali, Lelouch's little sister, and I found it so compelling as she tells Lelouch of the peaceful and gentle world she wants to exist. This world is one Lelouch wants to one day bring to her, and there's a pinky promise that happens where Lelouch promises to never lie to her. A sweet concept, but I do speculate that this could be more of a lying on technicality thing. Lelouch has Nonali as a balancer to himself because she reminds him of what he's doing it all for. Lelouch at his heart isn't a cold-blooded killer, which is evident by him getting sick in the bathroom thinking about killing Clovis, but as this power further and further changes him, I hope Nonali will continue to remind him of his humanity and what he's doing this all for. The world soon learns of the killing of Clovis, and with them needing someone to blame, Suzaku is labeled as a traitor and accused of the murder, which ultimately sets into motion the final act of this arc. Suzaku was an easy target and is used as a reason to further eradicate honorary Britannians and ensure that the Japanese continue to exist as second-class citizens and eventually become eliminated with only purebloods left. An absolutely horrid concept that we've seen attempted throughout the history of our own world. With this kingdom, theatrics are everything, and the funeral is no exception, as Prince Clovis's funeral is broadcasted to the entire world, and subsequently Suzaku is set to be paraded around as the traitor who was caught. Lelouch then begins his operation to save Suzaku and covertly enlists the help of Callan and Ogi as they're brought on a tour of the city, where as they enter the final train cart, Lelouch reveals his alias to be Zero, as he sports an interesting mask and outfit and gives them the rundown of his plan and attempts to unify them under the cause of destroying Britannia. As a side note, I really like the name Zero, and Callan points out that Zero as in nothing, as in like Lelouch is nobody or nothing, he's the voice in the darkness. I don't know, I find it cool. As we know, everything with the Britannian Empire is about optics, even with funerals, and Jeremiah, one of the leaders of the Purebloods, mentions that the funeral was planned even before the prince's death. This is pretty foul, but unsurprising given all we know about Britannia. Suzaku is then brought around, labeled as a traitor, unable to speak or defend himself, as supporters of the kingdom stand in the street to all take enjoyment in the traitor being brought to justice. This all culminates to Operation Rescue Suzaku finally taking place, where Callan drives a replica of the prince's car, which is a direct slap in the face of the apparent grieving empire, and makes a mockery of Clovis's death, as now the stage is set for Lelouch to put on a show as he, in front of the entire world, announces that he is Zero, the true man responsible for the killing of Clovis. A gamble, yet Lelouch has no hesitation because he has already determined how he'd win before the game even started, as he presents his bluff with the container believed to be full of poison gas, and he says that in exchange for Suzaku, he'll spare the lives of the citizens and not release it. This wager conceptually works pretty well because almost no one except for what I imagine the most high of nobles have any knowledge that there was never actually a bioweapon in the container. In their eyes, this gas could wipe out everyone in a large radius. However, this kingdom is corrupt, and losing citizens to bring down Zero could potentially be worth it to the military, so Lelouch uses his Geass to have Jeremiah call off any offense, and in doing so, Lelouch wouldn't reveal the kingdom's secret. This secret was a bluff on the biggest stage in front of the eyes of the world to sow dissent within the kingdom, knowing that their stain-free Britannia is hiding something so intense that they'd be willing to let go of the accused murderer of the prince. With their escape, Lelouch has pulled off the impossible and rescued Suzaku, and what I imagined it would be a joyous Suzaku. Instead, he was angry at Lelouch, and he wasn't angry at the country for being falsely accused. He was adamant in his belief of trusting the system. He didn't want to be saved by someone he perceives to be a killer and terrorist, and despite Zero laying out the world he wants to bring about, Suzaku angrily tells him that the ends don't justify the means, and Suzaku affirms that under no circumstance would he side with someone like Zero. Instead, he himself would walk his own path towards redemption and justice as he'd leave to face the courts, accepting whatever fate finds him. Honestly, all I could feel was respect towards Suzaku, regardless of whether I think his decision was right or wrong. Suzaku's idealistic to a fault because he believes that he could truly change such a corrupt entity from the inside out, especially not even being born of true Britannia blood no less. However, this is something only he can find out for himself, and he walks with his head held high. These two paths will undeniably converge as they both seek a better world, however, a better world through far different means. This continual contrast of Lelouch and Suzaku has been something so heavily emphasized already, and this is being set up for them to save the world together or destroy each other in the process. I just get the vibe that there's going to be a ton of heartache in store for me as I keep watching. With the arc closing as Nonali overhears the news of what's occurred, a familiar face thought to be dead appears in the background, being none other than Cece. I was filled with excitement at the realization that she'd be continuing in the story not as an element in the mind of Lelouch, but a character who we can get to know and invest in. There are so many questions regarding who she is, where she's from, how Britannia captioned her, and just how powerful she is. Honestly, design-wise, she's probably the best looking character to me, but with Lelouch's outfit when he rescued Suzaku, it put him up there in the best fit podium. He almost looked like a magician, which I unironically loved. With the introduction of Geass, I couldn't help imagine how I'd use this power. I'd probably look y'all in the eye right now and tell you to subscribe. As well, I'm a big fan of the constraints that were put on it to thankfully balance it in terms of the power scaling, and I question whether or not this ability will evolve to be used on the same person more than once, or if it's just set in stone as a way to permanently balance it. With it being dubbed the power of the king, and with Cece looking on Lelouch even when he was a kid, it brings into question whether this ability is able to be used by Lelouch because of his direct royal bloodline, or if he was the one that Cece's been waiting for because of him being the perfect candidate for the power. Very possibly it's both. For being of royal blood, there's so many question marks as to how no one else is aware of Lelouch's true name and identity, and why he was seemingly scrubbed from the royal family. It's clear due to the circumstances of his mother's death, there's something with Lelouch, his mom, and Nonali that the royal family wants no one to know about. Revenge, mystery, political strife, war games, real-world elements of social injustice, and a mystical green-haired wizard of sorts. Guys, I'm absolutely hooked. Everything they've been saying about Code Geass isn't just true, it exceeds what I was expecting out of a first arc. Hell, I didn't anticipate this video being nearly this long, especially for the first arc, but Code Geass is just that good. If you made it this far, please do consider dropping a subscription, as these videos take a ton of time to make, and there's gonna be plenty of more great content just like this. This has been hiXtrah, and as always, be greedier, and I will catch you all next time.